It's a terrible analogy, but I think it's like changing a golf swing, right? I've only become a golfer because I'm now a mid-50-year white man, right? So I guess we're supposed to do that. But you change a golf swing, like it gets way worse before it gets better, and it's months and months, and then all of a sudden it happens, right? But when you're in the middle of everything, I'll just go back to where I was. But there's a reason that you changed it, and I think many business decisions are like that too, where it's like things are rarely as good or bad as they seem in the moment. So just give it a little bit of time to play out. And if you made the decision for the right reasons, it needs time to be able to fulfill.
On Creative Assembly's The Spark podcast, our mission is to amplify Nashville's diverse creative voices, foster growth through shared journeys, and inspire a city that thrives on collaboration. And now, here's The Spark.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Spark. I'm your host, Mark Scrivner, and today I'm here with Brandon Edwards, the former CEO of Revive Health. And since selling Revive, Brandon, I know you've started Unlock Health. I know this is going to be an amazing episode. There's going to be a lot of people out there that are going to want to hear your journey, and I really appreciate you being here and giving to the Nashville creative community on the Spark podcast.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Brandon, just as we kick this off, maybe you could just take us through your journey. Where'd you get started? How'd you get into the advertising world? And what got you to where you're at today?
Yeah, so I did my undergrad at UC Santa Barbara and thought I wanted a career in politics. And so in 1992, drove across country to DC with about $10 in my pocket and took an internship on the Hill as well as doing some other work. Did that for a minute, came back to a district role, and then eventually ran campaigns for a little bit. And frankly, I thought that might sort of be the career. Like I loved the rough and tumble of politics, which, to be fair, was very different than it is today. It was much more collegial. You could fight with people in a campaign and then go have drinks with them that evening. It was just a little different situation. But then I got married, and we had kids almost immediately, and the idea of the hours and all the things that were required in politics, and frankly, the unpredictability of it, didn't suit what we were trying to do with our lives. So was at an agency that did both political campaigns and public affairs and crisis communications work for a while. Did that for a minute, and then ended up running crisis communications for Tenet Healthcare, a big hospital company that at the time was headquartered in Santa Barbara, where I lived. And I did 3 years in that role while I finished my MBA. Came out of MBA, was working in a corporate strategy and ventures group for Tenet, which was a ton of fun. Paul Kusero, who is the CEO of Amedisys, was the CEO of Amedisys, was my last boss at Tenet. He's a close friend, great guy. He did so much for my career, and I'm really grateful to him. Went back to the agency I'd been at previously, but this time as an owner, built a healthcare practice, and then the 2008 recession hits. And that firm was 1/3 real estate, 1/3 energy and natural resources, 1/3 healthcare. And a month later, it was 70% healthcare. And through a variety of circumstances, which I'm happy to discuss if you find it interesting, just had a difference of priorities and approach to business with the majority owner of that firm. And so I offered to buy out the healthcare practice, which became Revive. So bought a practice I'd helped to build, and formed Revive, which allowed us to separate from that firm, but also provide proceeds to that firm so that firm could survive the recession. And they did. And we started Revive, and things kind of took off from there. So we started that firm September 1 of 2009, and relocated the corporate headquarters as well as my family here. I think we opened an office here in February of 2011, and then moved my family here the summer of 2012, just given sort of the kids' ages and where they were in school and all that.
Was it, did you move here, relocate because of the healthcare scene in Nashville, or?
That's why we opened the office. Okay. So it's sort of hard for us to all put ourselves in the mental space of what was going on in 2009, 10. But for those of us who remember, it was pretty brutal, right? I mean, it was like you couldn't take a bank loan, you couldn't buy or sell a house, you couldn't find a job. If you had one, you were thrilled you had one. And we had started a healthcare marketing communications firm in Santa Barbara, which is not exactly a hotbed of healthcare overall. And so we decided to open an office here largely so we could recruit people. And I'll give my wife 100% credit for this, like most things. I came home from that trip when we were scouting out whether to open an office here, because it was sort of here or Chicago at the time, because we thought Chicago was sort of associations and health services. Here was, was mothership of healthcare, but it was a little different place in 2010, 11. And I came home from that trip, rolled in on a Friday night at like midnight. And she kind of looked at me and she said, how'd it go? And I said, good. I think we're going to open an office in Nashville. And she said, I think we should move there. And I'm like, look, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Like we bought this house. It's underwater at this point, right? Because it was 2010 or 2011. And she said, well, would you be home more if we were there than if we're in Santa Barbara, and you'd see the kids more and not travel quite as much, because I was on the road a lot. And I said, well, yeah, of course. And she said, well, why don't you just like track that for a few months? And if I'm right and you'd be home a lot more, we should move. And she's got to be like the only person ever to volunteer to leave Santa Barbara, right? I mean, you'd trample a small child to get to stay in Santa Barbara if you could. And so we, sure enough, kept track of it. And moving here not only allowed the business to just thrive and grow, but on a purely personal level, I probably reduced my travel by 30 to 50%. Because it's such an easy airport. It's a great city. And about 80% of our business was east of the Rockies.
Yeah. Well, you've built, like, Revive Health was definitely one of the biggest healthcare, marketing agencies, very well regarded in town. I know your reputation's just been amazing through that journey. At what point did you know maybe it was like, hey, we've built it to a point where, maybe it's time to sell?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the comment too, because I don't feel like I built it. I feel like we built it. Yeah. I had to take responsibility if it didn't go well, but the fact that it did, thank God, we had that. One of the things I learned from the previous firm that I was at, I mentioned that sort of relationship with the majority owner, was that having clarity about why the business exists is absolutely critical from day one. And I think many firms sort of become lifestyle firms, but almost by accident, because there isn't a clear plan for exit for the owner or owners. And I think, and I sense zero of this with you, so just to be clear, that I do think for some people it becomes a little bit of an ego exercise, right? They have their name on the door, they're on boards, and they're important, and people pay attention to them, and I get it. I mean, we're all just people, right? We're victim to that. We were very clear with Revive from day one. The firm was being built to be sold. And we were open with staff about that. It was in our very first strategic plan, September 1, 2009. We didn't establish a time frame. It was like, we'll know when it's time. And we were approached a handful of times prior to eventually selling, and the answer was always no. And then strangely, I think most people would assume you go to sell because something went wrong, right? Like you run into some problem. Ours was exactly the opposite. We came off a year, we grew 60% one year. And we all kind of looked around and said, wouldn't it be great to do business with some people who've done this before, who've like scaled an enterprise? We were only 10 million in revenue when we sold. And we ended up running a very non-traditional process, which I'm, again, happy to talk about it if you're interested in that. But it was really about finding the right cultural fit, the right strategic fit, and the right financial fit, and in that order. And we just kind of knew it was time. And I didn't make the decision by myself. In fact, it wasn't even limited to shareholders. We opened it up to our entire executive team at the time, was like 12 or 13 people. And the desire to pursue something was unanimous at that point. So it wasn't like we were doing it over people's objections or something. It provided a very nice return to the shareholders. I'm grateful for that. But more than anything is, I think at the time it was the absolute best thing we could do for the business.
Yeah. And I know we've talked in the past, and just, looking from the outside, you had a super solid executive team that, I know you'd grown, and they were all a huge part of this. So I know it wasn't just you, but, I also love how you're so open and authentic, and you just are strategic about the way you think about, even the sale of Revive Healthcare and how you took everything into consideration as you sold it. I've talked to so many people about selling an agency, and, nobody really talks it like you do at that level. And not really a question there. I just would love you to know that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think Oh, I mean, I'm not smart enough to remember all my lies, so it's just easier. It's easier if you just tell the truth up front. But I think beyond that too is, I think people, even if people don't necessarily love all your decisions, they respect it when you're direct and honest with them about it. And I knew there were people that didn't want us to sell Revive. I mean, there's a part of me that didn't want to sell it. There's a part of you that feels like this is yours. And, and I think you always have to hold in balance sort of the monetary with the other impacts, right? Like, does this provide better career pathing for people? Does this allow people to grow or take on, different kinds of work or whatever it is? And I think if people are really being honest with one another about it, they'll put all of that out on the table. What I have a problem with mostly, and you've heard this plenty, is when people say, I'm selling the business and nothing's going to change. It's like, well, if nothing's going to change, why are you selling it? Like, just keep doing what you're doing. And the reality is, well, you're selling it to provide a liquidity event for the owners. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't think it's a terribly motivating answer for the rest of the team. But it's a completely reasonable thing to do, right? You take a lot of risk. You deserve the opportunity for a reward in that.
Yeah, well, you created a lot of good wealth for your team, and I know they all had a little bit of a stake in it as you exited. And also, you had to stay on for a while to earn out the, all the stuff. So It was 5 years, and you worked with them for 5 years, and normally you hear after about a year that the founder goes, I'm checking out.
Yeah.
And something usually happens, but you stayed on for 5 years and grew it significantly over that 5 years. Maybe talk through that journey and maybe what it was like to work for another company, but you're still running your company.
So you're dead on. So we did a 5-year earnout. So 2020 was the final year of my earnout. I can't tell you how disorienting and bizarre that was. And we had a heck of a year that year. We grew 24%, I think, in 2020, pivoted meaningfully in the middle of that. But yeah, I think, and I actually stayed on for another 6 months as CEO to mid-21, and then another 18 months as executive chair, which is basically what they do with you when they don't know what to do with you, right? Like, you just get sort of placed on a shelf somewhere, break glass in case of emergency, I guess. I'll say this to begin to, is we had a great experience with the buyer. They are good people. They acted in good faith. They treated us very fairly. I have nothing negative to say, and I know many people have really bad experiences. I'm happy to share what happened after that, because there were some changes in the business subsequent. But I have nothing but good things to say. I don't know that I ever really felt like I was working for them, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. But because we were in an earnout, when you're in that earnout, there's a period of time where you're still acting largely autonomously. I would say the only two things we really integrated were financial reporting and technology, right? Which are all about compliance and protecting the business from risk. But there's kind of in an earnout especially, there's kind of a barbed wire fence that goes up around the firm, right? That says, hey, this is still yours to run, and there's a whole bunch of things that we as the buyers can't do if it's going to have any financial impact on your performance, which is all perfectly reasonable. So I sort of got spoiled in that I was bought and I had a boss, but I largely operated autonomously with very, very limited issues. And nor did they infringe on that. That's why I say I think they acted in good faith. I hope we did as well, and had a great experience with it, and would recommend them, frankly, as a buyer to almost anyone. We had a very good experience. Most of the people that did our deal have since retired or moved on in their careers. So there's not a lot of those folks that are still there, but it was probably good sort of getting my feet wet in that they were almost more like a board than they were a direct boss, which is not everyone's experience in an earnout. I can't say enough about the team that we had that, you've mentioned them a couple times as well. I mean, there was a group of people there that would have killed or died for each other. And that's really uncommon in life when you find that. Some of my closest long-term relationships came out of that work, and people that I either still get to work with in some capacity or just are still friends with as well.
Yeah. I wanted to invite you to our next Creative Assembly gathering. It's our relaxed, bi-monthly networking event in East Nashville, where ideas spark over drinks and creative collaborations come to life. We meet at 1530 Riverside Drive with light snacks, refreshments, and plenty of free parking. Whether you're an agency owner, part of a creative team, a freelancer, student, or even a business owner curious about collaboration, you're always welcome at Creative Assembly. RSVPs aren't required, but they help us plan for space and treats. Just search Creative Assembly Nashville on Eventbrite or visit creativeassembly.agency/events for details and the RSVP link. Come ready for connections, conversations, and creative collaboration. We can't wait to see you there. Well, you've mentored so many people. I mean, your executive team and, others out in the community, even myself for, I know you helped me
I didn't mentor you. We're just friends.
Through a ton, but I guess in that early journey, did you ever have do you look back and go, man, I had these couple mentors that really helped change the trajectory of who you were?
Yeah, I won't do all of the personal ones because there's plenty of that. I mean, I don't think, first of all, I think anybody that has a successful exit or even successfully runs a company, if they don't admit it, a fair amount of it is luck. They're not being honest, right? I think you can work as hard as you want, but some of it's timing, being in the right place at the right time, and just sometimes just dumb luck, right? Sometimes the thing you think you thought you wanted the worst in the world was actually the thing that would have been the worst for you, right? And you don't find it out until later. There's three people that I'll mention, and I'll try to do it just briefly for interest of time. So one, I would say very close mentor and friend to me is a guy named Roger Fisher. Roger had built a firm called Fisher Health, which was sort of the equivalent of Revive for med device and health technology firms. It was based in LA. He's 10 years older than I am. He had sold his firm exactly 10 years before. And he was so extraordinarily generous with his time. I would consider him a close friend to this day, and he's been retired for some time. The last day of his earnout was his 50th birthday, and that was the last day he worked, which means he did well for himself. He was incredible. I would say the second person actually preceded Roger, and I would say this was probably less about mentoring overtly and more about, you have those people you worked for that you'll always remember. There's a guy named Brooks Firestone. Started Firestone Winery. For probably some of the listeners will know Firestone Brewery. His family started that as well. He is the grandson of Harvey Firestone, who founded Firestone Tire and Rubber, but he moved to California and sort of took a risk on everything to start the first winery in the San Ynez Valley. And he hired me to run his first campaign, or my first campaign, excuse me. It was his second. And in fact, I just saw him. He's coming up on 90, and I just saw him a few weeks ago out in Santa Barbara. And I learned so much from him on frankly, how to treat people, but also I think how to treat people and how to balance that with the importance of family, which he was just amazing at and is incredibly close with his family. The third, and I'll try to not do it by name, but the third was actually a mentor, but not in the way that you mean. It was that the last company that I mentioned where there was a majority owner and I was minority. I learned so much, frankly, about how I didn't want to be, how I didn't want to run a business, how I didn't want to treat people. And I think a lot of people might view that as counterintuitive, why would you want to work someplace that was awful? I learned more there about how to do and not do business than I have in all of my time since then. It was actually incredibly helpful. Miserable at times, wonderful at others. But I can look back on it now and say so many of the decisions that we made at Revive or that I've made since were about not repeating what I saw in that. And actually, I'm really grateful for that. I don't know that my kids love this advice, but I've given them this advice of it's actually, if you're in a miserable place, it's actually good to stay for a while because you learn so much. If things are perfect, you never know what's going on. When they're not, you really do.
Yeah. As you look from the outside, everybody, looks at it and just says Revive. They were, on this trajectory. You just always a hockey sticking up.
Yeah.
Was there ever a time in the business where you thought, man, this is getting hard, and are we even going to make it?
Yeah, I don't think I ever believed that we were at risk of not making it. And I am not, and you and I've talked about this some, I'm not a big second guesser. I feel like you make the decision. Sometimes it's going to be a bad one. Sometimes it's going to be a good one. When it's bad, the trick is recognizing that and and pivoting. There was one year, and it was so we sold 1/1/16. In 2017, we did a complete reorganization of the business. Not recommended, by the way, in an earnout. But we did it in the beginning of the second year of the earnout, and it just was a crap year, like start to finish. I mean, by our standards, it was, I think we were exactly flat. I mean, we might have been down 1%. It had never had anything like that. I mean, our compounded annual growth rate over 13 years was like 26%.
Wow.
So to have a 0 meant you had to have a 60 somewhere, right? Which we did, thankfully, had it a few years before. There was twice in that year that I remember thinking very overtly, should I undo this? Should I undo these changes we just made? Which is very not like me, frankly. And people I worked with, including Joanne Thornton, who was kind of co-founder with me, was really great about saying like, hey, we made this decision for the right reasons. Trust your gut. Like this is a season and we're going to get through it. And it was right. That's exactly what happened. But that was a miserable year. It was one of those years you look back and it was like, we couldn't get it quite right. And we didn't have people in the right seats. And, anytime you shuffle the deck like that, I think it can be really hard. That's the only year. Like it was far from perfect, but I will tell you, like, I loved that team. I loved those people. I loved what we accomplished. I felt like we built something that we could be really, really proud of.
Yeah, such great advice, too, to stick with your gut. And so many people pivot so quickly and just change direction, but you guys stuck with it and got where you're at today. So
it's a terrible analogy, but I think it's like changing a golf swing, right? I've only become a golfer because I'm now a mid-50 year white man, right? So I guess we're supposed to do that. But you change a golf swing, like it gets way worse before it gets better, and it's months and months, and then all of a sudden it happens, right? But when you're in the middle of everything, I'll just go back to where I was. But there's a reason that you changed it, and I think many business decisions are like that too, where it's like things are rarely as good or bad as they seem in the moment. So just give it a little bit of time to play out, and if you made the decision for the right reasons, it needs time to be able to fulfill.
Yeah. What was, as you look back on Revive, and then we're going to jump into the next evolution, but at Revive, what was like one of your proudest moments, proudest campaign, just something that you kind of look back and hang your hat on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll have two answers for it. The thing I'm probably the most proud of is maybe not what people would expect, is that we were agency of the year, best agency to work for 13 times in 13 years.
Wow.
I am infinitely more proud of the best agency to work for than I am of the best agency, right? Because I think you can have an incredibly high performing business for some period of time and have it be a pretty miserable place to work. Again, we were far from perfect, but I think it was a group of people who genuinely cared about one another, and you could see it in the work, you could see it in the team. Like the chemistry was just sort of palpable. I am incredibly proud of the small part that I played in that. I think the campaign, there was a campaign we ran for Salinas Valley Medical Center in Northern California. So it's farm country, a couple hours south of San Francisco, a taxpayer-supported hospital. And we ran a campaign that was focused on diabetes and created a blue monster that was the physical manifestation of diabetes. And it worked in Spanish and English. It was incredibly creative. Christian Barnett, who's now head of strategy and creative at Unlock, actually helped develop that campaign. And it was one of those campaigns that you look at, and you've had these as well, that you look at and go, I wish I'd thought of that. Like it was such a good idea. When I'm much older, I'll tell the story and it'll be my idea. But right now, it's still Christian's. And it was just incredibly creative. And it hung around for a long time. Like it was really good work. It was highly effective. It did all the things it was supposed to do. And I would say that's probably, if I had to pick one, that's probably the one. We were lucky. We won a lot of awards and all that stuff. But but I think at the end of the day, for me, it was that we created a place that people actually wanted to be. That we were proud of.
That's awesome. What I guess, most people are going to sell their business. And maybe they take a year or 2, 3 off. And did you always know there was something next? And I guess if you did, what was the gap in the market that you felt like Unlock Health was going to, take advantage of?
This is such an important question, I think, for people that are more in an executive audience, because number one, there is no roadmap for this. Anyone that tells you there is not being honest. And it's weird. It's one of the few times in your life that everyone has an opinion about what you should do. And everyone has the same opinion, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. Everyone's like, you're going to the beach, right? Like, you're done. You're going to the beach. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm 50. Like, I don't know. Am I really? First of all, that's a long time at the beach. Second of all, there's only so much golf you can play, right? Mm-hmm. At some point, you're going to hurt yourself. So when I transitioned into the executive chair role summer of 21, if I'm being honest, I was just bored. Like, I'd gone from working 100 hours a week, 7 days a week, to working almost not at all. And at the end of 20, we decided we were going to start spending part of the year in Hawaii. My wife and I did. And so we were spending time there and in Nashville, sort of splitting. And I asked that very question that you said, sort of, is there a gap in the market? Because I think generally speaking, world needs another marketing agency like a hole in the head, right? I mean, there's thousands and thousands of marketing agencies. So to me, it was, is there a gap to fill? So it wasn't, what do I want to do? It's, what do I think the gap to fill is in the market? And took quite a while to just think about it. And I don't usually do that. I tend to be prone to action, even if it's not the right one. And it took some time, put together a little deck that I started having some conversations with private equity firms about. And because for me, it was, if I'm doing this, I want to do something that's different enough that it's interesting. I want to fill the gaps that I never felt I could properly fill at Revive. We didn't have deep pockets, right? It was just whatever money we earned. We weren't going to go into debt over it. And then we got an earn out, and you got to watch every nickel. So there were parts of the business that we just couldn't build out, or chose not to build out the way we wanted to. And so for me, it was, can it be different enough? Can it build on something that I know, and can it meet a meaningful gap in the market? And trying to be clear-eyed about that. And so that was really the process. And then I probably had 30 or 40 conversations with friends or past clients or others, just say, what do you think about this? And it morphed considerably as a result of some of those. So yeah, that's really kind of what led me to it. I thought for a hot minute that I might be done. And then it was sort of my deal with my wife, as I said, I'm going to play out all this due diligence. And if I can't get excited about something, then we're going to enjoy our lives. And maybe I'll serve on some boards or something. I don't know if anybody'd have me, but do some of those things. Once I got excited about this idea, then it was just a question of like, okay, how long am I going to be on the bench before we can get our first acquisition closed, right? Because when you're starting something with investors like that, a little different from the venture community where you raise money and then you start. In this case, the money gets deployed in your first acquisition. So there really isn't a company until a first acquisition closes. It ended up not being a long time. My last day at Revive was 12/31 of 2022. And my first day at Unlock was, I think, February 3rd or something of 2023. So only about 5 or 6 weeks. But there was a meaningful taper at the end of my time at Revive, as you might imagine.
Yeah. Well, you've stitched managed care, marketing, and tech into one platform with Unlock. I guess what value does that create for your clients today?
So I think I'll give you the more complicated answer in a second. The simplest answer is we have developed a solution, and I think this is what the market was asking for, that allows you to have one hand on the lever of volume and one hand on the lever of price. And if you hired anybody else to do either of them, they can't do the other. So now there are plenty of clients who only want one or the other. There are only plenty of clients who are only going to do one thing or the other. But at least for those clients that were open to the idea of a single growth-oriented partner, we could deliver both of those things. Very uncommon to find those things in our environment. So for me, it started out as sort of problem definition, right? Most agencies don't really understand technology, are not technology forward. The technology firms tend to not want to offer services because it's not as profitable and it's harder to scale. And none of them knew how to do the managed care stuff because that was largely in our industry done by either very, very large firms, Huron, Guidehouse, firms like that, or very, very small firms, 3 to 10 people in sort of a more regional boutique, just not much in the middle. And those very, very big firms also represent insurance companies, which is a little tricky if you're a healthcare provider. And the people that only represent healthcare providers on a regional basis tended to maybe not always have the analytic sophistication that's necessary. So we saw a sweet spot in that. And I think so far the market's responded. We've built managed care de novo up to almost 10% of revenue, and growing very rapidly. We'll grow about 42% this year on that part of the business. And Kevin Thilberger is our chief managed care officer. I've worked with him for 20-something years. He's just an exceptional leader and understands the market in a way that just a lot of consultants don't.
Yeah. Well, your site mentions like authentic healthcare marketing.
Yeah.
Like, how do you guys operationalize that authenticity?
Yeah. So to your point, we also split. This was a big learning as well. I think the holistic solution is very valuable for clients. Unlockhealth.com is our site for marketers.
Okay.
Unlock Managed Care is our site for CFOs and chief revenue officers and chief managed care officers. We've obviously made no secret about the connectivity of it, but they have very unique value propositions when operating independently. What we see is most people that want to use us for both actually do it. They've hired us for one or the other, and then it's more of a cross-sell or upsell situation. Authentic healthcare marketing was an idea that Shannon and I came up with 9 months ago now. I'm trying to think of the least political way to say this. So the idea of authentic healthcare marketing in the post-truth era was an important combination because I don't think most healthcare organizations struggle with being authentic. I think they struggle with being authentic and effective. And the efficacy is what gets lost in this post-truth environment because we generally work for large institutions and their marketing features experts known as doctors in an era that distrusts institutions and experts. So there's about 50% of the population that looks at it and says, I don't trust anything you're saying because someone with a fancy title and a bunch of degrees and a white coat is delivering it. I think that's unfortunate in many ways, but I think it's a reality. So to your point, what we didn't want this to be was sort of a nice idea that gets us on webinars and podcasts and, get to produce stuff, but not make it real. Like if we're going to do something called authentic healthcare marketing, it damn well better be authentic, right? And it better be real and play out. And so that's actually kind of where it started to say, if we're going to operationalize this, what does it look like? While the book was still being written. And so that is now manifesting in a proprietary research tool that we developed with a firm called Klein & Associates. Rob Klein and his wife are absolutely fantastic researchers, do a lot of healthcare related work. They developed this healthcare authenticity index for us that measures dimensions of authenticity. So there's 4 dimensions of it. It creates a scoring mechanism for an organization compared to their competitive set. It identifies the very specific qualities that roll up to that authenticity index. There is now a tool that allows us to pressure test our own creative and our own marketing against that to ensure. So, and I think that's really just beginning, right? In many ways, we're helping to develop sort of authenticity centric chat GPTs for our clients to say, is this in the right brand voice? Have you considered these factors? So it sort of plays out in 100 different ways. But the idea is the idea, and I think it's a real one. I think the way more important question is how do you actually make it real?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned AI, and I was going to go there. So, that's a big tool for the industry right now, big talking point.
Yeah.
I guess how's it working for you today beyond that? Are there other ways you're using AI? And then do you see like there's still like a bunch of hype around it in other areas?
Yeah, I think both things are true, actually. The joke inside Unlock is I think I learned to spell AI about 6 months ago. So I would say my answer to this question really has evolved, and evolved more rapidly than I would say many of my views. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have said, we're going to be really cautious here. We're going to go slow. We're going to test. We're going to try. we're going to pilot, we're going to do this, we're going to encourage people to use it, not require it, all kinds of those things. I have a very different answer now. I think that might have even been the wrong answer 6 months ago. But I think about 3 months ago, I just realized we can't screw around with this anymore. And what is optional is now mandatory, and what is testing is now got to be ubiquitous. And I would say the biggest pivot difference for me mentally is I thought about how we use AIs in our current workflows, our current ways of working, and that AI would be an enabler in that. Now what we think about is how do we design workflows around AI? And that's a major change in thinking, right? Because it goes from, well, Mark, how would you like to do it? And how would I like to do it? And how would Sue like to do it? And it goes to, what's the best way to do it that AI sits at the center and drives those efficiencies? Do I think there's a bunch of hype? Absolutely. I mean, we're hearing this, not so much in our sector yet, but in the pharmaceutical sector, for example, firms analogous to ours that work in that sector are being told there's an RFP coming out and you can do the same work you're doing now for 30% less, or you can do 30% more work for the same price. Which one would you like? And by the way, if you pass on the RFP because maybe you're not ready or whatever, you won't get the next one. So I think pharma tends to be more like CPG than the rest of healthcare in many ways, in my view. So I think, do I think that sort of efficiency expectation is coming our way? I do.
Yeah.
I think our industry is pretty ripe for this. So I think there's still some hype around. Everyone wants to talk about being AI powered and being innovative and this and that. And I think we have competitors who tell a good story, but maybe aren't operationalizing all of it. I've just taken the attitude here that I don't want to be all hat and no cattle. So we're starting with making it real and then working on telling a better story about it. My biggest issue is, and we've been very clear with our staff, not one person will lose their job over this. There may be people someday we don't hire because of this, but it will not in any way be a change in our current lineup of staff. I think that's sort of crude in some ways,
Totally.
but also I just think it's very short-term thinking, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing that companies actually promote that, hey, we've been able to reduce the workforce, when really like what clients are looking for, I'm sure you see it as much as we do, is they're looking for more work, better work, faster work.
Yep.
And it's like, utilize these tools, but I'm sure your clients also, as you go into these conversations, they're probably asking you, hey, how do you use AI and how could you help us kind of think through how we might be able to use AI?
Yes, exactly. And so it's a really interesting question as well, because I think some industries are more at a point of like, we're ready to implement. I think a lot, and I think this is good instinct. I think healthcare providers are a little bit more reluctant to go super fast because the consequences of being wrong are very, very high, right? If you get AI wrong in sports, is it the end of the world? Probably not, right? I mean, maybe if it hurts your favorite team, I guess. But the consequences are lower, I think. I think our clients want to know that we're using it. I think they want to know that we have a plan, and I think they want to know that we know enough to help guide them in their own decision making. So we've actually seen. We started a digital experience kind of consulting offering as well as implementation. Many of the things we recommend in the consulting offering are not things we own, right? I mean, we're directing people to market-based solutions, including AI, and some of those are clinical applications as well. Not because we're some big clinical experts, right? But because we just have visibility into available marketplace solutions that others may not. I think largely our clients are over the should we be worried about this phase and are now in the maybe where I was 6 months ago, actually sort of how do we deploy, how do we be thinking about this, and how do I ensure that the agencies or consultants that I work with are equally adept and able to help me navigate that together.
Well, you mentioned this earlier about moving to Nashville because of the proximity around the recruiting and, around healthcare leaders and whatnot. I guess, is it very similar to Unlock's journey that being in Nashville is a huge strength for you?
Yeah. So, interesting for me, prior to COVID, I was very much an office guy, right? Like I like going to an office. I like working in an office. I like seeing all the people I work with in an office. And, and we were and I traveled all the time and still did that, right? Like when I was home, I was at the office. COVID changed all that, obviously, right? And the company that had bought us, even though our earnout had ended, did not do return to work for some time. I mean, I think I remember that they shed something like 1.5 million or 2 million square feet of space globally, which is actually hard for me to wrap my head around. I would say, and if I'm being honest, I miss that. I miss seeing the whole team every week. Unlock's been constructed differently, so about 10% of our workforce is in Nashville. This is essentially the executive offices. The entire executive team is here except for our chief revenue officer, as well as a number of other people. But we have recently sort of reprioritized our hiring plan to say every person we hire is either going to be in Nashville or relocate to Nashville. And it will be the exception for really hard to find roles or really rare roles that we would go somewhere else. And I think it's because it feels like we're coming up on that phase where there's a little bit more in the office, there's a little bit more people together, and what we've found is that it was less because of what I wanted and more what the team wanted. Is the team wants to be together more, and I'm really excited for that because we have employees in 20 states, I think. I'm just better in person. Like I don't even know if I'm better. I just like it better. So like maybe it's just purely selfish. I don't know.
Well, you did make a huge acquisition a few years back, and I guess maybe all those offices were across the country. It wasn't like they were all in Nashville either, right?
That's right. So our first acquisition had been purely remote from the day they started, but they had 2 subsidiaries, one of which was Minneapolis-based, one of which was Denver-based, I think, and had offices. And then we bought a firm in April that was headquartered in Houston. And then we bought SPM Group in November of 23, which had a very significant office in LaGrange, which is just outside of Chicago, as well as one of the subsidiaries had an office near Baltimore in Columbia, Maryland. And so we've rationalized the office footprint. And, and I think more than anything is the focus there was really to move as quickly away from yours, mine, and ours into a single brand, a single executive team, a single set of workflows and pricing, a single set of common expectations, values, culture, all of that, and as well as systems. We implemented Salesforce, Workfront, NetSuite in a year, and a lot of change for everybody. I would say by the end of 24, I could honestly look and say, okay, we really have brought all this together. And those people that were more office-oriented have become probably a little bit less so, and those that were never in an office are now sometimes in one. And we've had to find other ways of making sure that we engage people. So we go out twice a year on a listening tour where we'll meet with people in person, sponsor meetings and events and those kinds of things as well. But yeah, it's been a very different animal. Also, some of the viewers or listeners may be interested in this, but when we were starting, I had a lot of people tell me, like, this is going to be so different for you. You built Revive organically. All companies have been built organically, but building through acquisition is totally different. I don't really think that's the case, actually. I think the difference is when you build organically, you just have your people problems or issues one at a time. And when you do it through acquisition, you just have them all at once. Right. And so it's the same stuff. It's just people, and people have their things and they want raises and promotions and title changes and, and all of those sorts of things. And I just don't really find it that radically different. I think it places different demands on you as a leader, but I don't think it's sort of fundamentally different. I think it's just accelerated in a lot of ways.
Well, I know in the past we've talked about you have ran Revive and now I'm sure Unlock with the EOS system. And so you're very strategic of where we're going, setting goals, things like that. Yeah. Like how does that play into the hybrid? Is it you still see the same effectiveness?
Yeah. It takes a little bit longer, I think, and that's part of that just change management with people. I actually think that EOS is a really interesting tool to rally people around, right? So what does EOS really do is it creates common language, right? It creates a common language, a common set of expectations, and certain common practices, like an L10 meeting, for example. I think we have actually found those things to be incredibly helpful. So 3 of the 8 companies that have now become Unlock used EOS already. So there was some familiarity inside of it. And I think it was actually really helpful because it gave that sort of shared language. And, you have to get through that season where the people that aren't familiar with it make fun of it, right? Because we all use those very specific terms and all of that. But it has been very helpful. I do think it has limitations the bigger you get. I think an L10 meeting is really hard to scale all the way down through an organization at all different levels. We still use it at executive team level and at certain other venues. But I think also recognizing, like, do you have to run every creative department meeting as a level 10 meeting? It's like, I don't know, maybe not. We're trying to leave a little room for the Holy Ghost in there, let people sort out for themselves how they want to work well together.
Yeah, well, you've scaled quickly and been in a growth, company ever since you started. And so what is like a must-have profile for like leaders that you surround yourself with?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot about this because I do think ultimately your job, my job, any CEO's job is mostly about assembling the right team and ensuring that there is cultural and value and behavioral alignment with those people. Because I think it's, in my view, teams behave as well as the worst behaved person on the executive team. And that's usually the CEO, unfortunately. So I would say, first and foremost for me, it's every single role we hire, they have to be smarter than I am at what they do. I think it's actually one of the unique things about being a CEO. I've thought a lot about this is almost every other people manager in the world, they're better at what they do than their subordinates are. That's why they're managing them. And that's exactly not true in CEOs, right? Every person that reports to me should be better at what they do than I am. That's why they're in that seat. And that, for some CEOs, I think is really intimidating. I don't find it that way. I'm grateful to have people that are smarter than I am at those things. But, my chief people officer should be way better at HR than I am, right? God knows my CFO should, and, better at finance. And so I think number one is just raw smarts and intellectual curiosity. So too much of that's not how I do it, I don't find helpful. Because I think whatever you were doing a year or two ago, what are the odds that's exactly the same way you should still be doing it? So I think that kind of combination of just smarts and intellectual curiosity, I think, not everybody has to want to come have Christmas at my house, but I think it's really important that we like each other. So for me, that probably manifests in, do we have a shared sense of humor? Because I think if people can laugh together, they're going to be more comfortable with one another too. And I think ultimately it's driven, but I want to be careful how I say that because I don't think everyone has to work the same amount or at the same pace. I think when I say driven, I mean more, probably more oriented toward, are you constantly looking to be better? If you're satisfied with what you've accomplished, you're probably not going to like being a part of my executive team. If you're really driven to succeed, if you're really driven to do better, if you're willing to examine the way you do everything, if there's a better way, and then maybe that ties into the intellectual curiosity in some ways. So I think it's some combination of like just good human, kind, smart, intellectually curious, and I think overused term, but I think a certain element of servant leadership. Like I can't hire someone who thinks they're above certain kinds of work because I don't think any of us are.
Yeah, man, Brandon, I'm taking notes myself, and I'm sure the audience is as well.
Haven't always gotten it right. Haven't always behaved that way myself, right?
Yeah.
Like there's plenty of things I could have done better in that. But I think if you aim at that, you're much more likely to build a great team.
Yeah, well, what's the next 3 years look like for Unlock Health? And Like, what do you see in the industry? What are you the most excited about?
Yeah, so I think we're about to enter a very interesting period for healthcare providers. I don't intend this to be overtly political statement. Not a fan of OBBBA and its impact to the healthcare industry. I think actually, if you fast forward maybe to 2027, for healthcare providers, 27 will look a lot more like 2007 pre-ACA. In terms of the level of uninsured. I mean, there's just a bunch of stuff that I think is fundamentally not good policy. Like maybe it's good politics, but I don't think it's good policy. I think it would be natural for people to assume, oh, we're going to go through this difficult period, so marketing budgets are going to be affected. I think they will be if you can't prove value. Mm-hmm. And if you can't prove value, you probably shouldn't be doing it anyway most of the time. But I think, a friend of mine, a guy named Nate Kaufman, will say, when food becomes scarce, table manners decline. And I think we're about to move into a period where table manners will decline a little bit. We're not seeing that in our business, nor do I think we will, because we have such an emphasis on ROI and such an emphasis on efficacy of campaigns in our work overall. So I think it'll be interesting to see. We do continue to see sort of secular shift from spend on traditional advertising and marketing to spend on digital. Continues to accelerate in that direction. That started some number of years ago, but it feels like it's snowballing even faster now. And I think ultimately we will see more and more of our revenue coming from consulting work, not just managed care consulting, but we'll call it sort of business consulting, right? Your overall business strategy. We talked about that digital experience consulting. Less people just buying a campaign or something specific, and more like, help me solve this problem. Help me think through what this looks like long term. And we're investor owned, so at some point there'll be other investors or buyers or whatever. I mean, that I doubt it'll be in the next couple of years, but it might be. Sort of 2 or 3 is not unreasonable. I just think there's so much room left to grow and so much more to achieve that that will be more about investor dynamics than any need on our side ultimately.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't want to close up the episode without asking you for advice to, there's a variety of different people that listen to the podcast. So you've got agency owners, you've got marketers, you've even got students, but let's just say it's a person starting an agency today. Like, what advice would you give them?
I think it is different starting one today than it was when we started Unlock, but certainly when we started Revive in 2009. I think maybe a small number of things. I think one, who you surround yourself with as your true inner circle matters more than anything else you're going to do. I got great advice from my friend Roger that I was telling you about when I was starting, is he said, no one's going to tell you this. The day you start your firm will begin the loneliest season of your life. And he goes, I'm not saying that to discourage you. Yeah. He's like, but you have to understand, you've always had someone to go to ask the question. And now everyone's going to be looking at you to answer the question. And it can be pretty lonely. And I think there's something very healthy about that, because if you're not a little bit lonely, you actually think you have all the answers. That's probably the problem, right? Mm-hmm. The minute you think you have it all wired is when you really are profoundly screwed. So I think one is surrounding yourself with people that you really trust, that have the same values, that have an attitude of abundance, right, as opposed to scarcity. People that see the possibilities, people that view challenges as opportunities. People that say we can run through that brick wall if we need to, and you for them, right? Not just them for you. It has to be a shared sense of that. I think another piece of really good advice I got early on was that everyone charges too little when they're starting. You're a brand new firm, you're small, and you feel a little weird or a little guilty, and especially if you've been a client, you know what it's like to get those bills. And I think really being clear about your worth, right? And projecting your worth and projecting your confidence in that, and being willing to try things and fail. Years ago, I had a friend who was becoming a CEO say, I'm terrified of being seen as a failure. And I said, well, I think there's an important question. Are you terrified of failing, or are you terrified of being seen as a failure? Because if you're terrified of failing, you shouldn't do this. Like, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail. If I bat about 500, I feel like I'm doing pretty good. I'd be in the Hall of Fame if it was baseball. But I think that person said, no, I'm afraid of being seen as a failure. And they're like, don't you think about that? And I said, literally never. Not because I think I'm right all the time, because I don't know, maybe it's a blessing or a curse, is I just don't think about what other people think of me. I mean, I want to be a good human. I want to treat people well. I don't always get that right either. But I don't sit around worrying about whether someone else thinks I was right or wrong, because I don't think anyone's going to be a harsher critic than I am of myself in that ultimately. So I don't know if that was good advice or not, but at least a couple things that people can think about a little bit.
Some great nuggets there. So is there anything I haven't asked you, or that maybe you want to talk about that could help the audience?
You know, I don't know if this will be relevant for everyone, but I'll just say is we tend to underthink the personal side of starting an agency. I mean, my wife and I have been married now for just shy of 29 years, and you have the same experience. It is really easy for building the agency to crowd out everything else you do. And I traveled a lot until we moved here, 200 days a year. After we moved here, maybe 125 to 150. Like, that's a lot. And I do not say this flippantly. The only reason we're married is how amazing she is, because a perfectly reasonable person would have left me at some point in that window. You know, we had 3 kids in 38 months. You know, like, there was a lot. And not only do I feel incredibly lucky at who I picked, or maybe she picked me, but I think as I've gotten older, I've become much more mindful about work playing its appropriate place in our life, as opposed to being the centerpiece of our life where it crowds out everything else. And I did not get that right for a lot of years. Like, we were laughing kind of the other day. There is not a single picture of me on vacation until about 2 years ago that I wasn't on the phone. Wow. And it, like Disneyland, there's the kids going on a ride and I'm standing over at the exit on a call. You know, I am not proud of that, just to be very clear. Like, I wish I had handled all of that a lot better. But I think on it now, and I think, boy, I wish I had been able to separate the important from the merely urgent. And I just didn't know how to do that. So that's a big thing for people to think through if they're either starting an agency or partnering with someone or whatever that looks like.
Well, Brandon, thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks for all your great advice and just everything you're doing here in the Nashville healthcare marketing scene. You guys are building something extraordinary, and I think a lot of people are looking at you, and you're doing amazing. So I know I don't need to tell you that, but thanks for that. Giving back on the show to the Nashville creative community too. So
thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk with you, but also I love this kind of format with people, and I've watched a lot of the ones that you've done. And my good friend Colton you had on as well. So
thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for joining us as well. And I hope that if this episode with Brandon sparked anything, that you'll subscribe, rate, and review, and even share this with other creatives out there in the Nashville marketing scene that you think it could help. But thanks again for joining us on The Spark. We'll catch you next time.
And that's a wrap on this episode of The Spark from Creative Assembly. Thanks for spending time with us and exploring the minds shaping Nashville's creative future. If you're walking away more inspired, connected, or energized, that's exactly the point. A big thank you to our sponsor, Snapshot, and the incredible team behind the scenes who make this show possible. Your support fuels every conversation and keeps collaboration alive. So if you haven't already, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, stay creative, stay curious, and keep that spark.